humans quite interesting, even though you are a worthless, greedy lot. How annoying that sound is.
What you're seeing here is a clip from the 1985 claymation film The Adventures of Mark Twain, and something about it just feels unsettling. Maybe it's the lighting and framing giving this otherworldly, threatening vibe. Maybe it's the uncanny look to the characters on screen, feeling as if at any moment they could look directly at the imaginary camera right at you. Or perhaps it's the concept of what this scene is trying to convey. In this moment, our main characters have been lured by Satan itself to gaze upon what humanity is at its core, violently fighting with each other until their sudden and often unexpected end. A harsh but true message that many of us would want to deny, that to say it is the worst potential scenario, we could never fall to these kinds of circumstances. But, given so many examples in ancient and recent history, this is a philosophy that still holds relevance to this day. And all this from a children's film with a PG rating. There's probably a few of you looking at this thinking, why am I wasting time talking about two things that really don't belong together? Horror and animation. One being the act of scaring people, and the other being made to entertain children. Both of these things are incorrect. Horror is probably one of the most versatile and compelling genres in all of fiction. It can be applied to a wide variety of different formats. It can be surreal, it can be used as a statement on our society, or even used for comedy, when done correctly. As well as animation, from its earliest form it's been used to create worlds and characters that simply wouldn't be possible in our reality. Along with having so many different styles and art movements to pull from, the possibility for these two forms of storytelling to merge together, creating something unique, is practically limitless, but sadly remains frustratingly untapped. And I think I know why there's been so little of this specific subgenre, which comes from a certain amount of commercial intent. It's no secret that films, TV shows, video games, books, etc., that these are creative mediums that are made to make money. Shocking, I know. Producers, when overseeing a product for a potentially large audience, will want to have that project appealing to a lot of people, so casting big name actors or employing creatives who have had a successful track record, even if it's no guarantee of quality, will draw in as many viewers as possible. They aren't as concerned with the craft that goes into making a good film or a piece of art. That's a director's job. But they also know how people will react to iconography or uses of music. Just look at how the backlash to the Sonic movie design was molded into something that actually encouraged people to see the improvements made because of their input. So this idea of having popular trends or appealing aesthetics is fairly common in a lot of mainstream animation, and while it's not unheard of for more unconventional projects to achieve success, it is very much an exception rather than the rule. This presents a real problem for this particular kind of entertainment to reach the broadest audience possible. Given the sheer amount of work that needs to be put into a project, it's necessary for them to sand off the edges that could potentially offend or not draw in more mainstream attention. Which, from a business standpoint, I understand, but film can be more than just a way to pass time. They can offer experiences we can't have on a daily basis, and as morbid as it sounds, I think the big appeal of horror comes from the sense of unknown, having any sense of security taken away from us. Which is why some of my favorite pieces of horror actually come from texts that don't necessarily fit the standard definition of what you'd expect. Take for example the first Uncharted game. While I don't think it's held up particularly well in terms of gameplay, the one bit that's always stuck with me has been Chapter 19, Unwelcomed Guests, in which you have to switch on these generators on a, quote, abandoned submarine. At this point in the story, Nathan Drake's adventures are filled with all the bombast and excitement you'd associate with your standard action-adventure title, with clear intertextuality with the likes of Indiana Jones and the early Tomb Raider games. But then, the supernatural presence that's been lingering in the background suddenly is made overt, with the monsters now being an active opponent that you have to deal with, not only forcing the cover-based shooting away in favor of more claustrophobic intense gunfights. This change can also be felt in the visuals themselves. with a reddish color palette and more underexposed lighting, with that synergy telling the player that this is the point of no return, that you have to push through this new threat. Having something overtly scary appear in genres that they wouldn't commonly feature in has been something that's always fascinated me. And while Uncharted might be a strange example to consider given the clear reference from previous texts that influence its narrative, this inclusion of out-of-this-world entities whose existence clashes against the established setting, this unexpected nature can produce some of the best examples of horror in any medium. Which leads me to the film I actually want to talk about, which is 1998's The Prince of Egypt. This film is spectacular in a lot of respects, from its sheer scale, amazing music, as well as it being arguably the most well-realized take on the story of Moses. It's a narrative that commands your attention, which is achieved through most of the film's visual language, showcasing Egypt as this grand empire built on the backs of slaves in broad daylight, never afraid to show the cruelty towards the Israelites and their suffering. This is important as I believe films, regardless of its demographic, can convey themes that anyone from any walk of life will interpret on screen without having to be told. That's why good visual direction, writing and acting are all key in conveying the encoded messages, as a lack of clarity in any of these will lead to confusion over what is being shown. And despite what I've said so far about suffering, the film itself is actually really enjoyable. The characters are all well realized and watching the story unfold is really engaging. Whether you were forced to watch this out of religious reasons or not, I say these things because I don't want this to be lost in an argument of this being an overtly religious text regardless of the source material. With all that I've said so far, it might be weird to say why a film about the faith and a conflict between brothers would be horrifying, which for the most part it isn't. I mean, yes, there are the scenes of the plague unfolding across the land, and the film does what a lot of DreamWorks' best flicks do and treats its viewers with respect. It does talk about overtly tough subject matter, not shying away from the awful acts the Egyptians have done. Everything that has been shown up to this point in the narrative has effectively set the stage for what is to come, and why the particular sequence that follows feels so alien. I'm of course talking about the Angel of Death. As humans, we have been granted 5 different senses that have allowed us to interpret the world around us. Film primarily makes use of 2 of these senses, sight and sound, and throughout its existence, cinema has found countless ways of using these to create unease in the viewer. Take a look at the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock, whose tactic of letting the viewer know of the incoming threat increases the tension of the sequence as we are anxiously waiting for the inevitable. Up until this point, The Prince of Egypt has been a feast for the eyes and ears. We have been through all the highs and lows with Moses, so when we reach the scene beforehand where Ramses declares he will never let the Hebrews go, after everything these 2 characters have been through, we know the status quo cannot be maintained, and a decision will be made where there is no point of return. The music and visuals have worked in synergy with these changes in mood, so when the scene happens, we feel the sudden change. Zimmer's score is gone, being replaced with atmospheric foley of wind and curtains, and all of the warm saturated colors have disappeared, replaced with this dull white glow. We're locked into this uncomfortable sense of anticipation. By purposely going against all of the established visual and audio codes that have been used up until this point, we know something is about to happen, something that will change these characters forever. And then we see it. There's no jump scares, there's no music to unsettle us. Instead, the Angel of Death sequence uses the change in power and visual storytelling creating images that have stuck with me for a long time after my first viewing after so many years. If I've done my job correctly, I will have shown you that horror doesn't have to be limited to a particular age rating or medium to be considered real horror or meet some objective standard, as well as how sometimes the way a sequence is put together can ultimately affect how we interpret it, and how sometimes the best pieces of horror can come from the most unlikely of places. And that's going to do my first video. If you've made it this far to the end, wow, thank you. I've been meaning to do my own content for years. I've always been watching video essay channels and listening to film podcasts and stuff like that. And I have no idea where this is going, but hopefully I'll have more fun doing it. It's mainly just a way for me to practice on my editing and audio stuff on the side, because we need stuff to keep us productive in this weird climate. But if you've somehow made it to the end of this video and would like to hear me talk even more for some reason, actually find my podcast below, Talking Crap About, where two of my friends and I just chat about recent films, games, and stuff like that. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and thank you for listening. I hope you're doing safe, and until next time, stay safe.